In Nanaimo, not too far from where I live, there's a spot called Colliery Dam. And I think the Colliery Dam lakes were formed for coal mining. But not much of that happens around Nanaimo anymore. So instead, there is this beautiful recreation park. And when I first discovered this series of dams, my favorite place in all of them was to stand at the lower one. Because at the lower one, there's the lake, and it's lovely and serene. And then there's this little channel, and it's about a third of the width of the sanctuary. And it's only a few feet deep, and the lake would pour out into this little raceway. And it was only a few degrees of grade on it, but the water would just accelerate down this little raceway. And after it had gone about 70, 80 feet, there's an edge, and the water just shoots over the edge. And so when we were first there in October and November, we just stand and stare at this raceway, because the sheer amount of water that would go over the edge was almost too much to comprehend. And the water would get churned in this process, and it would almost make you dizzy because it was just all consuming in your vision. Just the other day, I went for a walk in the park again. But we've had very little rain. And went to this lower spot on the lake, and there's no water going through the raceway. So where there's normally a foot or two of water that's flowing ever faster over this edge, now there are a few pine cones and a lot of dust sitting in this raceway. And I think it's at moments like this where we realize how important water is. When we're concerned about every leaky tap and every broken toilet and the length of our showers, we remember what a gift water is. I also think it's appropriate that this happens at this time because it reminds us that often in the Middle East, this is what water is like all the time. There are very few places in the world where people can use water to the extent that we use water. There's just not that much of it some places. And so you have to be much more careful with water. So then you realize that when John is baptizing in the River Jordan, or when people of the Jewish faith tradition would go through ritual cleansing, this full immersion in water would be much more rare than it is for us. Now, last week, we spoke about sacraments. If you were here last week, this is going to be a recap. If you weren't, this is a kind of a summary. Sacrament, we said, is something ordinary that points to something invisible. It's an outward sign of an inward grace. Does this sound familiar for those of you who are here? So an outward sign of an inward grace. So we take something ordinary like water, like bread, like wine, and it points us to something extraordinary. It points us to the grace of God. It points us to the abundant, undeserved, overwhelming love of God. And we talked about bread and wine and water. And we also talked about blackberries and decks of cards and shovels, mixing bowls, how those very ordinary things can also point us to the extraordinary. And the interesting thing I think about this is that these ordinary things are all over the place, and somehow they can point us to the mystery. So today, we have a baptism where we take water which these days is a little bit more scarce than it was 6 months ago. And we say, this water points us to this invisible grace. It points us to the grace that is all around us. As I was thinking about baptism, I was thinking, there are maybe 70 of us here today, and we all would have a very different understanding of what baptism is. My experience of baptism is different than your experience of baptism. And your experience of baptism is most likely different from the experience of baptism with your neighbors. And so when I say baptism for Shirley, it might conjure up a set of images and a set of theology. And then when I talk to Karen and ask her about baptism, it might be completely different. Does that make sense? So we each have these different ideas and visions of baptism. And I think the unfortunate part is they actually have divided us more than united us. So I want to show you a video clip here from "O Brother, Where Art Thou?" from the baptism scene.
Human heart. Now, what the hell is that saying?
Appears to be some kind of a congregation. Care for some gophers?
No, thank you, Delmer. A third of a gopher would only arouse my appetite without bedding her back down.
Oh, you can have the whole thing. Me and Pete already had one. We ran across a whole gopher village.
Well, I guess hard times flush the chump. Everybody's looking for answers. So where the hell's he going?
Well, I'll be a son of a bitch. Delmar's been saved.
Well, that's it, boys. I've been redeemed. The preacher done washed away all my sins and transgressions. It's a straight and narrow from here on out. And heaven everlasting's my reward.
Delmer, what are you talking about? We got bigger fish to fry.
The preacher said all my sins is washed away, including that Piggly Wiggly I knocked over in Yazoo.
I thought you said you was innocent of those charges.
Well, I was lying. And the preacher said that sin's been washed away, too. Neither God nor man's got nothing on me now. Come on in, boys. The water is fine.
So what I find interesting about that clip is, I think it's hilarious, but that image of baptism might be a very different image of baptism than some of you would recognize. My mother still has my baptismal gown from when I was a young baby, and it was at a font not too dissimilar from this, in a congregational setting like this. Different ways of going about baptism. Delmar there, he saw that experience and 30 seconds later he was in. Other people journey for a long time. Difference. The preacher there doesn't even know Delmar, which is interesting. Like, hey, you want to be Baptist? Sure, go for it. I don't do that. I like to get to know the people who might be baptized. It's funny, but it's also really sad because we've developed some pretty big divisions over the idea of baptism. In history, there are recorded instances of people being killed or executed for their specific view on baptism. That is beyond comprehension for me. It arises out of these arguments where we put people into boxes. So let me ask you a question. Are you a Paleo-Baptist or are you a Credo-Baptist? If you're a Paleo-Baptist, you're the kind of person who believes in infant baptism and that all babies must be baptized right away. And then if you're a Credo-Baptist, you believe that the only way that you should be baptized is when you're old enough to recite the creed. And if you were baptized as a baby, well, that's no good. And you must be re-baptized. And so these two factions, the Paleo-Baptists and the Credo-Baptists, would go head to head, and there's people all in the middle of it. It seems kind of silly to me. A little too much conflict over this symbol. Granted, it sparks some pretty big discussions. In the story we read today, John's baptizing with water. And when Jesus is baptized, he receives the Holy Spirit. So does that mean Jesus didn't have the Spirit before he was baptized? Seems a little strange to me. Does that mean people don't have the Spirit before they're baptized? I know lots of people who aren't baptized who certainly seem to have the Spirit of God working in them. So while I was researching baptism, I use a database sometimes of scholarly articles that are printed in published journals that are vetted by academics. And this is one of the titles, Flannery O'Connor and the Problem of Baptism, Sectarian Controversies in the River. And it gets better. This is a different one. The monadic formula of water baptism, a quest for primitivism via a Christocentric and restorationalist impulse. You want to read that article? Yeah. Or baptism, faith, and severe cognitive impairment in some medieval theologies. So much has been written about baptism, and so much controversy has been generated around baptism. So what are we actually doing? Let's see if we can boil it down a little bit. Let's start with this idea that there is abundant grace. Let's start with that as a foundation, maybe for all of our theology, that there is abundant grace. I think many of you liked this quote from last week. Human beings may separate things into as many piles as we wish. Spirit from flesh, sacred from secular, church from the world, Paleo-Baptists versus Credo-Baptists. But we should not be surprised when God does not recognize the distinctions we make between the two. Earth is so thick with divine possibility that it is a wonder we can walk anywhere without cracking our shins on altars. Let's start with this idea that grace is everywhere and that grace is abundant. From that grace, we respond with baptism. That grace has been going on and will continue to go on long after we're here. But in a moment in our life, we respond with a baptism. It's a little bit like a gift. There's a gift that's being constantly offered to us, the gift of grace, over and over and over and over and over and over again. And we're taking a moment to say, yes, I will accept this incredible gift of God's abundant, overwhelming grace. The thing about baptism is we don't do it as individuals. We do it as a whole community. When we had the baptism at the lake a number of weeks ago, you were all invited to come because we're baptizing into a community. And when we have the baptism today, it's not just one person's choice, it's the whole community's decision to say, yes, we recognize your choice, and we are going to support you as you walk in your journey. So later on, there will be a promise, and we ask that you commit to this journey as well. And finally, So, it's important to do this in community because our plans, we think they're going to go like this. We think our faith journey or our plans in life is like, okay, I've just got to get up this slight incline on my bicycle to get to where I'm going. And that's not the way life goes, and that's not the way our faith journeys go either. They look a little bit more like this, right? You go upwards a little bit, and then you fall off the cliff and scramble over some rocks and get up the other side and cross a little rickety rope bridge, and then either zip line or boat across to get a little bit higher, and then fall off the cliff again and go through some rainy, chaotic time in your life where you scramble up the hill on a ladder as you journey. So we baptize into community, recognizing that we're all in this together. So there's abundant grace. We respond with baptism in community without forgetting that we're shrouded in the mystery of it all. We're going to take some water and sprinkle it on Kathleen's forehead, and is she going to be like a completely different person? Like Kathleen 1.0 comes out and Kathleen 1.0 goes in and Kathleen 2.0 comes out? No, I don't know. But in this water, with this ordinary water that's from a tap that might come out of any of your taps that is in the ocean that runs over that cliff in Colliery Park, something extraordinary is also happening. How that works, I don't know. But we're surrounded in the mystery of it all. I invite you to close your eyes for a second and just listen. This is, O Magnum Mysterium, O Great Mystery. Leave you with this quote. But first-rate liturgical symbolism, so we can have the nicest service in the world, doesn't make a good baptism. Neither does caring for the earth. God's grace makes for a good baptism. A grace that infuses the definitively holy water of every time and place. God moves in whatever water is available. God plants in us a place, but also forms us for the life of the other places, for the whole, fragile, holy, water-soaked world. Amen.